Gospels. Now, if I take the position of the historians, as you were suggesting I would do, and deny that Pilate was reticent, and if I perceive of Pilate as a very brutal individual who wanted Jesus dead, then I would conclude with other historians, with Michael Grant, for example, in his book An Historian's View of the Gospels, and other such historians, that Jesus actually died on the cross, and that he did not physically, bodily resurrect from the dead, that his disciples had an extraordinary vision of him, because his disciples wanted so badly to believe that Jesus was alive with God, and so they wanted to believe it so badly that they saw him.
And this would not... Paul too?
Say again?
Paul and James, they didn't want to see him alive. And what about the empty tomb? Empty tomb is, I think, does away with the vision theory.
No, but well, here, Paul's vision, as you're saying, as an enemy of Jesus. There is something to say about Paul's vision, because Paul himself, in his first letter to the Corinthians, he said that that the devil might appear as a bright, shining light, so that many might be deceived. So Paul's testimony that he saw this light cannot be a full and final convincing argument of a physical nature, that Jesus physically, bodily rose from the dead. Second, you mentioned James. Now, what has been found in the evolution of the Gospels over time is that, starting with Mark, the family of Jesus had been given a bad rap. It's not like in the Mel Gibson movie where Mary is everywhere there with Jesus by his side and kissing his feet and getting the blood on her lips. In the Gospels, in the Synoptic Gospels, starting with Mark, the family of Jesus looked bad, and so too his disciples. And so, of course, his brothers don't believe in him. His mother doesn't even seem to understand him in Mark's Gospel. So Jesus denounces her earlier on. And so that is there for a reason, because later Christianity would follow the line of Paul, and because there was tension between Paul and the original disciples of Jesus and the family of Jesus, so Paul was celebrated, and the family and disciples of Jesus were denigrated. So James comes off as a disbeliever, and later on he is the head of the church. Now you have said that is because he has seen a vision of Jesus, but that's not necessarily so. If we go on that strictly historically, historians would say that the fact that James was the head of the church known in Jerusalem, that is a proof that in fact he was not a disbeliever in Jesus, and that in fact the Gospels have given him a bad rap that he did not deserve. Okay, so now, turn it around, you do not have still a proof.
Let's bring this to a close. We're a little off proportion in terms of who's saying what or how much is going on here.
It's difficult to follow, I know.
It is. And again, we want to keep the proportion even. Let's have you ask a final question of Mike, and let Mike respond to that before we go to questions from the audience.
Yes. Mike, I have shown in my discussion about the evolution of the Gospels how in the Gospel according to Luke, Jesus appears to the 11 disciples on Easter Day. Whereas in the Gospel according to John, Thomas was absent. Now, I've said that John has deliberately worded it this way so that he can create a new event for the further appearance of Jesus. So John is expanding the story, giving us more proof, more physical hard evidence to deal with. How do you deal with this contradiction of facts here, and the fact that we can see that John is doing this? How do you reconcile these different appearance narratives?
I guess first I'd say I'm still on this other hill, and that's the Gospels you're referring to. But I don't think John is so much is expanding as we have Luke contracting. In Luke's Gospel, it seems like everything happens on Easter. He appears to the Emmaus disciples, then he comes back. The Emmaus disciples come back and they say, hey, the Lord appeared to us. And the disciples say, yeah, he is risen. And he appeared to Peter. And then Jesus appears in their midst, and then he comes out and commissions them as well. So it seems like everything happens in Jerusalem on Easter in Luke. But in Luke's sequel, Acts, you go to chapter 13, verse 31, and he says that Jesus, after having been raised, he met them in Galilee and accompanied them back in Jerusalem. So he kind of expands a little bit there and tells this.
I don't think you got the citation correct. I'm sorry.
No, it's 1331.
Yeah, the reference is correct, but what you're citing is not in there. You see, what Peter is saying is that Jesus did not appear to everyone, but only to those who had accompanied him from Jerusalem, from Galilee rather.
Right,
So
right,
it's not
but that's the disciples there. And
yeah, but you see, you're putting it differently. You're saying that Jesus appeared to them in Galilee and then accompanied them all the way back to Jerusalem. Whereas, what Peter is saying there is that Jesus did not appear to everyone, but he appeared only to those disciples who had accompanied him in the first instance all the way from Galilee to Jerusalem.
all right, here's what it said.